2, 3, 4.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Power of Music Thinking. My name is Christoph Zürn, and this is the podcast for people with a musical heart and a wicked job. We're looking for stories, insights and tools from the big world of music to inspire leaders and followers to listen, tune, play and perform in whatever field you're operating. Well, it's this time of the year, and I'm not talking about the countdown until the Christmas or holiday season. I'm also not talking about the word of the year or any other review that is compiled and curated by, air quote, specialists. I'm talking about you, or better, about your data, or even more close, about your musical behavior, taste, and most played songs. Yes, it is the time where all Spotify users get their personal wrap-up of the year. But this episode is not about the making of the wrap-up. This episode is about musical genre types, technology, and research with musical behavior. My guest today is Glenn McDonald, data alchemist of Spotify and founder, programmer, and producer of the Every Noise at Once website that holds and updates examples from all genre types Spotify is tracking. We talk about personal music algorithms, genre categorization, subsets of listening, what you can learn from listening data, and how listening behavior shapes communities that can be the start of a new genre. Glenn shares with us how he compiles playlists and his Spotify account, and also memorable sonic experience when he heard the band Low for the first time live, opening up a door to a transformational moment. Okay, let's dive into the conversation. Welcome, Glenn. Welcome to the Power of Music Thinking.
Hi, thanks.
I'm a fan of your website since quite some time. And before we dive into it, one question at the beginning. What was your first sonic experience or record or LP or even a performance that had an impact on you?
So I think for me, the moments that are the most memorable are the ones that feel like opening a door and discovering another world is behind it. It's a world that presumably lots of people on the other side of that door already knew about, but that I didn't know about. And I have those all the time. I think the first, I'm not going to answer the first one. I'm going to answer a recent one for a reason. The one of the many ones that sticks with me is the first time I saw the band Low play live. And I picked this one because Mimi Parker, the drummer and singer in Low, passed away a couple weeks ago. And so I've been thinking about her and the band a lot. And, you know, I'm like, I grew up a rock fan, like Rush was my favorite band for a long time as a kid. And I grew up in Texas in the late 70s and 80s. So it was like album rock era. And so like Foreigner was normal music to me. Like if you just, I expected a random song. It was probably going to be a Foreigner song. And so I grew into a more adventurous listener over time, as I hope most people do, but still like pretty focused on high energy, metal and rock and loudness and volume and busyness. And, Neil Peart remained my favorite drummer. And so I like Low on record. They're a very slow, spare band, but the really transformational moment was seeing them live for the first time and really getting a sense for how much interesting music they made out of what seemed to me at the time to be few elements. So Mimi, who's a drummer, would stand in front of like one floor tom and a snare and one cymbal. And so for me, used to seeing Neil Peart's kit with like 20,000 toms and chimes and triggers and like 50 different cymbals that make slightly different splash sounds. Seeing Mimi like standing there, not even using her feet, like doing a thing that looked, physically simple, but was musically so powerful. That was definitely a transformational moment of realizing, all right, like it's not that I was wrong about all the other things that I like. I still like them and they're still amazing. But here it was like opening a door and realizing, oh, and all that wonder can be produced in these other ways. And so that was a gateway for me to a lot of other bands who, explored what can be done with fewer elements instead of more elements.
And it was through a live performance, right? So and what would you call that door? Was it like from was it your first concert?
No. I mean, I was already in my 20s when I saw them. So I've seen a lot of shows, but that and I'd heard, it wasn't the first like quiet band I'd heard either, but it was seeing them live that really made me focus on what the elements were. Because, you hear the recording and you don't see the people, so you're not quite as aware of exactly what's going on. The physical presence of the people.
Right.
Like when you hear their song, you don't see them not doing things. Yeah. And when you watch them live, you see them not doing things. And it's the not doing things that was really powerful for me.
I don't know them. So is it a trio or how many people are playing? What's the...
Yeah, it's a trio. I mean, they were no more because they can't exist without Mimi. And it was a couple, and Alan Sparhog plays guitar and Mimi played drums, and they both sang, and they've had various bass players over the years and have done some things as a duo too. They're from Duluth, Minnesota. They're cool. They were one of the signature slowcore bands in the 90s.
Nice. Yeah, I will definitely.
They're an amazing band.
Thank you. Okay, Glenn. Now we dove into the music, into the first sonic experiences. But who are you? What do you do? And what do you do for a living?
Who am I? Well, that's a very large question, but at least the what do I do for a living part is somewhat answerable. I work at Spotify. I got there by virtue of the acquisition of a startup called the Econest that I was working at before Spotify. The Econest tried to do music recommendations and sort of cultural and acoustic music analysis as a service for other companies that were doing streaming music, and eventually got bought by Spotify to do that just for Spotify. And so I've been at Spotify for long time now, 8 years, I guess. And my funny job title is data alchemist, which
sounds good.
There's a long story behind it, but the point of it was that it's not a data scientist. So if you think of a scientist as trying to find the truth, an alchemist is just trying to turn things into other things. So that's what I do. I try to understand what is possible to learn from all this listening data that we have and turn it into listening experiences or insights or something. So I work a lot on personalization algorithms and on genre categorization, thus the websites, and sort of anything that extracts human insight from data patterns, much of which has to do with communities of people, either communities of interest, which is how I think of genres, or physical communities like the people in a country or a city, or demographic groups, or just like any subset of people, or any subset of listening, which could be a subset of people or it could be a subset of times, like Christmas listening, or are there Thanksgiving songs, is sort of the same shape of question to me as what do they like in Estonia, or what do uplifting trance fans really like in uplifting trance at the moment.
Yeah. So what can you track? You can track where people listen to that music, from what country they are. And I think it's all anonymous. So it's just the big data that you can gather.
Yeah, I mean, a Spotify account, you have to pick a country.
Yeah.
Because of licensing. So with every account, we know what country it's attached to, and although we don't track your location, like in the Spotify client or anything, we know what IP address requests come through, and so we generally have a sense of approximately where you are at the city level, or at least where your device thinks you are, which isn't always where you are, but it's usually close enough to try to get collective insights.
Yeah, right. And is there any artificial intelligence involved, or how does it work? So because there's a lot of data points, and someone has to try to make these combinations.
We do a lot of AI or really machine learning at Spotify. I don't. I'm like the old-fashioned math department, so I write a lot of SQL queries and do a lot of, technically boring math, like dividing things by other things, and sometimes even logs and square roots. None of it is very complicated in mathematical terms, and it's sort of unsatisfying. If you're trying to be a machine learning engineer, then you wouldn't want my job, because I'm not generally pushing the technical frontiers. I'm trying to figure out stuff about music, and it's amazing how good simple math is at that. Like the proportions of listening of anything coming from one place versus the rest of the world tells you usually what you need to know if you get the thresholds right without anything fancier.
Okay. So the reason why I contacted you was what I said earlier. I'm a big fan of your website, everynoise.com, or Every Noise at Once. And to the people or to the listener that don't know the website, I will put them in the show notes just to check them out. But actually, it's like one big internet page with different genre types. And you also count them. So as of today, I saw you're on 5,987 different genre types, and all the information comes from Spotify. But you had this website earlier. Maybe you tell a little bit about what is everynoise.com, and there's and how does it how it works.
Yeah, sure. So the project underlying it, of course, is this genre taxonomy, and that began at the Echo Nest before we were acquired, and really took off once we were acquired, because at the Echo Nest we were powering these things and we had a lot of data, but what we didn't have is a lot of direct listening data. And so the corporate acquisition dance was we wanted to provide a service to Spotify and to everybody. And to do a really good job of that, we needed listening data from them. And of course, every potential partner was leery of the idea of giving us their data when we also had their competitors as partners. So getting acquired was like sort of a corporate inevitability. So then with the help not only of more listening data, but of more people, because I don't do that part of the project by myself by any means. We have kept at it. So I think when I first put up Every Noise, the website, it was visualizing maybe 400 or 500 genres.
Okay.
Just kind of where we started. And I think basically I got it to 1,500 or so via my own stubbornness, and then got more help. And I have a particularly amazing coworker who is responsible for most of the 2,000 to 6,000 jump. So the original source of the visualization was a diagnostic tool, because one of the things we did at the Echo Nest was we tried to analyze music programmatically for psychoacoustic attributes that model how you experience music. So like energy how energetic does this song seem to you, is a thing that you can't really do just by signal processing. So it's done with machine learning. And again, that part I don't do. But when we were trying to learn new things, like we were trying to model how electric or acoustic are songs, and how do they have vocals or are they instrumental?
Yeah.
Through automatic analysis, like useful things to know.
So just to understand it right, if you say if a song had vocals or not, so there was not one person listening if there were vocals, so the system was finding out that there are vocals on that particular song, right?
That was the idea, because there's 65 million songs. So
Yeah,
having
right.
a person, having people listen to them all and punch a button to say whether they're vocals seemed like not tenable. And it already seemed untenable in 2012. And of course, the amount of music being uploaded to Spotify every day is now an order of magnitude or more higher than that. So it's good that we didn't go down that path. But the hard part, that's not hard to do. Like, you do a bunch of training examples. You get some college interns to listen to 1,000 songs and tag them, and then you feed them back to a machine learning process that says, well, if of those 1,000 songs, if these are the ones with vocals, then I can try to see what are the telltale signs of that and apply that logic to the other 65 million. And the hard part of that is telling how well you're doing, because you can't go check the other 64 million and change, otherwise you would have tagged them yourself to begin with. And it turned out that like aggregating those scores by genre was really helpful. So if you're looking for vocals, then you want to see that like classical piano should rarely have vocals. And country music should probably have a lot of vocals. And so the first version of that map was a scatter plot of genres to debug the training of these attributes. And then after a while, I'm like, actually, even apart from this technical task, this is kind of an interesting way to look at things. So there were several iterations of like making it readable and usable on itself, as opposed to just diagnostic. And that's how it came about. So the front page is, I think of it as a map, but in technical terms, it's a scatter plot. Like it's not very sophisticated. It's just an XY plot, and then there's a bunch of fiddly code that bumps the genre names around, so they're not on top of each other, so you can read them. But the up and down axis goes from mechanical at the top, so like synthetic instrumentation and rigorous timing, like the space between each beat is exactly the same. So tech house and stuff, and you can click on the names and it'll play you samples that tell the story very nice. So you click on the top and it'll go, and as you go down, it gets both more acoustic in instrumentation and more flowy, like human timing. In a classical piano piece, if you plot it out at microseconds, probably no two notes are exactly the same number of microseconds apart, because the pianist is like manipulating the flow of time as well as the pitch space. And then left, right, left is sonic density. So things that are very steady, full sounds, which could be like roaring black metal, where it's all distorted, or like classical organ, which is a very different sound, but also a very steady, like, no spaces between the notes generally. And then the right side is the opposite. So spiky or bouncy. So hip hop and reggae are over there, but also like political oratory or people reading poems aloud or audiobooks would be there, where they're not really beats, but they're spaces between the sounds.
Yeah. Interesting way to I just wanted to say to look at it, but it's also to listen to it. But who came up with the genre names? Because it's with nearly 6,000 different genres. I can read a few of them. I have the website open. It's like Latin American Baroque, American 21st century classical. It's troubadour, Hokin, chakra, Kappa, Haka, never heard of. And it goes on like a Drupat, okay, I know that one, a jazz harp. So there are 6,000 different types. Who came with the name of these types? And there must someone must said, "Oh, this is so Tuvan folk."
Yeah, right, exactly. So none of it is automatic. So there's always a human saying, "All right, this is a thing we're going to add, and this is what it's going to be called in our namespace." And most of the time, that's obvious and boring. So, like, yeah, 21st century classical, like that's. I guess it's coining a name in the very technical sense, but I think it's obvious. Most of the people there would, even if that's not the exact phrase they would always use to describe themselves, they would immediately recognize, yes, that's a thing.
There's also birdsong.
Yeah, sure, birdsong. Like, okay, I mean,
cool.
We could have called it like vocalizations of birds.
Yeah.
So some human said, all right, birdsong is shorter and catchier. The thing to understand why there's 6,000 of them, and also to understand the naming challenges, is that we think of genres basically as communities of artists or listeners or practice, usually some combination of all three. And so the tricky cases are where there are multiple different communities with different artists and or different listeners, different audiences that think of themselves in the same way, with the same name. So indie pop, for example, is a term that has been used by a bunch of different communities for themselves in different places and different times. And so we have at least a minor challenge in figuring out unique ways to refer to all the things that might be referred to the same way by the people in them. And every once in a while, the interesting naming problems are we do recognize the existence of genres that are mainly driven by listening patterns and not necessarily by the artists themselves thinking of themselves as being peers.
What would be a listening pattern?
Well, we can find clusters of listeners who share fondness for the same artist. Even when those artists, it's not necessarily obvious that those artists share a style, and they don't necessarily come from the same place. But we can see that, yes, fans of these artists tend to be fans of the others. So, a sort of notorious one of those that got some a mixture of interested and incredulous press was one that I called Escape Room.
Okay.
And so this is like the extreme of naming is my total failure to think of anything descriptive or obvious for one of these listening based clusters. Was like, in retrospect, I might have called it intersectional pop. It's like Lizzo and the space around Lizzo sort of into pop in one direction and into hip hop and trap in the other direction, and often with a sort of social justice angle or awareness of something. And so we could see this audience in the listening data very clearly, but there wasn't a name for the kind of thing that those people like, nor for those people. And when forced to come up with one in order to represent it, I totally failed to think of anything that would make any sense. And so Escape Room was like, all this music was very hot and trendy, and escape rooms were trendy, sort of becoming a thing at the same time. And there was some notion in my mind about that there was a derivation from trap music, and escape rooms were about getting out of a trap. And so it kind of made evocative sense to me. But given that there was no like emergent name for this music from its listeners, it was just give it a name so I can show it to people, and then people can say, this my thing or not. So the best result for me was seeing people say, I don't know what this name is and I've never heard of it, but when I look at the list, yes, this is my music.
All right.
you found exactly my taste, and that's like the goal of the whole thing is
Because
to
these names
find.
are also used, let's say, in the app. Could I search in the app now, like Ukrainian classical or like Latin American classical piano? Is this how people would search?
Yeah, there are playlists for all the genres, so you can find them, and they're surfaced in the APIs. They're used in external apps, and we use them in Wrapped at the end of the year. So
Yeah, right.
they appear in various places.
Absolutely.
And they're also used a lot behind the scenes to feed into recommendations. There's a bunch of things that you might get on your homepage in the Spotify app that aren't labeled with genres, but they're using the genre taxonomy behind the scenes to try to find stuff that you might like.
Okay. Okay. Because on the website, you also can do your own research. Like I just saw today the something. Did you call this the aqueduct of youth?
Yeah, that was a thing I did for a presentation at the pop conference a few years ago. Oh. The theme of the pop conference that year was youth, the listening and music of youth. So
yeah, but the subtitle brings you kids music so you can listen young. So this will be if you're a little bit older and maybe in different genres, then you would find something that you might have never heard before. So it's also good for exploration into a different field. Also for trend researchers, they also could use the website to find out what's something that's coming up. And we must say, because it's I just said these are the 5,987 genre types, but every time a new genre type is added to the list. And what are the criteria, or when happens this, or how does this work?
Yeah, so there's like three ways that we add genres. One is just continuing, because like that's a lot of genres, but it's not all the things that we want to model. So there's just ongoing work of figuring out, all right, what have we not covered? And a lot of that has to do with, reach the places in the world that streaming has reached last or hasn't reached yet. So every time Spotify gets ready to go into another country, and there are not very many left. So this part of it will eventually slow to a crawl. We're like, all right, we're going to launch in Egypt. So, all right, let's spend some time like reading up on the music of Egypt and see what's our coverage like? Do we have Egyptian hip hop? How many like subgenres of Egyptian hip hop that nobody else knows exist? And do they have enough artists on Spotify for us to model them satisfyingly? And yeah, so that this ongoing work is like one of the things. The second thing is just emergent genres. So like new stuff happens, and generally, we try to model things when they have a sort of critical mass. So we're not really looking on my side for like there's one guy has invented a new thing and given it a name. Like that's not quite what we're after. We're after like a community has started to build around this idea, and that community has a collective name that might behavior. One person. Yeah, or like there's a scene there. It's got listeners. It's got a thing. So like Drift Funk is like a super popular, fairly recent development, and it reaches a point where we see we have a bunch of things that monitor trends and how people talk about music, and so they can see when a new term is coming up that we didn't know about before, and some human still has to go and look and say, all right, can we model that with what we have, or is it all like not on Spotify? And then the last one is I have a bunch of things which I refer to as the genre miner, which are bits of code that go through listening data looking for lumps of taste that we don't have labels for. And so that again is it's not an automatic process, but it finds lumps of what might be gold or might be just like sparkly trash or something, and puts them on the screen so a human can look at them and go either, no, that's not a thing, or yes, it's a thing, but it's not a genre. It's like, that's a record label. Like the things they all go together, but it's just like one record label, not a wider cultural movement. So we don't need to add that. And sometimes it's like, that's a thing, or that's not quite a thing, but it gives me a hint at what might be a thing, and I can go try to do a better job of modeling that.
I think that's an interesting way to look at the whole modeling. One approach would be that you start with classic pop, classical music, pop, opera, and all these, and they are all also there in it. But as more as so the question is sometimes, is there first a genre and then you have the bands or the orchestras playing that genre, or is it what you just said? What I think that sounds a little bit like your second category. So there's something coming new which doesn't fit 100% to one of these big genres. So that's interesting from one part. So more let's say the musicology part. Some people listen to it and say, oh, this is this and this is that. But the other part, what I think is so interesting, is the community part. So it's not about what, let's say, the musicologists say what it is. It's about how different people at a certain time, at a certain place, in a certain region, listen to something that is maybe constructed from different angles. So I think that's an very interesting approach.
Yeah, me too. And like at one point I tried to make a list of the kinds of genres, like the kinds of distinctions represented by the genre space. And even that got long. Like some of them are geographic, some of them are historical, some of them have to do with lyrical content, some of them have to do with instrumentation, some of them have to do with like production styles. Like there's a wide variety of, not just a variety of things, but a variety of kinds of things, which is in it, like, it's meta interesting to me to try to think about, all right, what kinds of distinctions do we make? And like, how do we recognize units of culture?
I think that's interesting. And it's also my question for, let's say, the Power of Music Thinking podcast. So it's not about music, or not only about music. What we're looking for is also to make some kind of analogies to the other world. So if you're, let's say, the data alchemist and your data is, let's say, music, so what other data alchemists that maybe have totally different kind of data, what could they learn from the way from the Every Noise website?
I mean, I think the most portable thing, I mean, I have to answer this question practically because as Spotify gets into things that aren't music, inevitably someone from whatever new thing it is will get my name, and I'll get a message that they want to talk to me. And the question will be, well, give me some hints on how to apply what you've done with music to blah. And so like podcasts was the first blah. And so I had to think about, all right, how does podcast listening differ from music listening? And how does that affect what kind of insights we can get out of it? And, the interesting, obvious difference between music and podcast is music, you have people listen to songs over and over again. So you can use repetition to try to get a sense of how much people like things. And people don't generally do that with podcasts. Like, to listen to an episode once, if you really like a podcast, you'll listen to all the episodes, but you generally won't listen to them all 50 times like you would a Taylor Swift song. So you have to use different techniques. You have to focus on the show instead of the episode to have any real signal there. And, then audiobooks comes along as the next thing. And it's even worse because you have a book. The book is sort of like a show and the chapters are like episodes, but then you don't it would be wrong to try to measure your affection for a book based on the number of chapters it has, because
absolutely. And even with an audiobook, it would also be interesting who's reading the book. And maybe that's also the link with the podcast. So in the podcast, you have the host, and that voice more or less is, let's say, more or less the same, or more or less the same rhythm in most of all the conversations. But if you have a guest, then every guest is different. Sometimes you have a more speed or more volume, and sometimes it's maybe more intimate, and maybe more pauses in between. Is this something that is also, let's say, analyzed?
It is, and you're sort of getting an important point. Like, much of what I do in terms of personalization is trying to figure out what the listener is thinking or responding to, and at what granularity it's like most helpful to model that. So, in music, sometimes you like a song just because it's that song, and like, you really love the song, but you don't necessarily love the artist or the genre or the era or the country or whatever. It's just like, no, this song just does it for me. And sometimes that song is a part of why you like the artist, and it's really the artist you're attached to. And sometimes it's the genre, and you like I will listen to any Gothic symphonic metal band. My analogy for this is like, I love burritos. Like, I will eat a bad burrito. A bad burrito I would still enjoy it. And like, if you ask me for a dinner recommendation, I'm probably not going to recommend to you a bad burrito place unless I know that you really like burritos and you just haven't been to this one yet. And so Gothic symphonic metal is like, that's a thing that, anybody who makes it, even if objectively I can tell that this is not the best band at this thing or ever, I'm just like, but I don't care. I love this thing. I love to hear anybody do it. So it's the same kind of thing with anything in life. You're trying to figure out what is the theme that unites the things that you like. You as a listener, you as an eater, you as a human. What is the common element in your friends, or the places that you like to travel, or the clothes that you like to wear. There's something probably that unites some of them. And so, like, understanding, how many clusters of clothing taste do you have? Like,
yeah, right.
I have my black hoodie taste, and I have my shoe taste, and those are probably correlated. Like, other people who also wear black hoodies probably tend to wear similar shoes, maybe, but not necessarily. So,
yeah. And maybe it's not only about the color, maybe it's also about the fabric, the kind of how it looks, and that's a little bit also compared to music. For the Power of Music Thinking book, I did a playlist with 25 different versions of The House of the Rising Sun. So you could say the original genre, that's from the Animals, or I don't even know if it's the original is from the Animals, but they were the most famous. And then a lot of people are covering this with different genre types, even some instrumental. And I found that so interesting to offer people to find out for themselves what triggers them. Is it the song that they know? Is it the lyrics that they understand? Or is it the atmosphere or anything? So I really love that part. And so it's just also one way of organizing these genre types with the example of one song.
I do a bunch of those, actually. Really? I make a bunch of playlists of hundreds of covers. So that the one of seasonal relevance, every year I maintain a playlist of the new covers of Last Christmas by Wham, done since Last Christmas. And I've been doing it for, I forget, 4 or 5 years or something. So there's I don't know, 1,500 of them total. This year, I think I'm up to 180 or something. It's fascinating. Pretty much any time there's like a new super popular pop song that I like or that I find is interesting in some way, I'll do one of these. So I have one I'm working on for Anti-Hero by Taylor Swift. And we're sort of in the golden age. I mean, maybe it'll be even more golden. Maybe this, in retrospect, won't seem like the golden age, but compared to when I was growing up, and you had to put out singles, you had to put out vinyl to get music to people. This is the golden age of cover versions, because you can do it and upload it and try to find the audience of people who liked the original, and that just wasn't practical in the same way in like 1984. So yeah, and two of my favorite bands, so of course Spotify Wrapped will have come out by the time people hear this, and my top 5 artists will almost inevitably include two bands who just do covers. They just do basically pop punk / metal versions of everything. One is called First to 11, and the other one is called The Animal in Me. They're both great, and almost every week they have one or two new versions of whatever's popular. And I'm just, like, it's like the burrito. I'm a sucker for a pop punk version of anything. And it's super interesting to me to have two bands that basically do kind of the same idea, because they always come out differently. And I'm always interested to hear, all right, that's interesting. They took a slightly different take on even the seemingly formulaic exercise of make a pop punk version of Anti-Hero by Taylor Swift.
Right. It's also interesting how it also gives you an indication how they listen. What type of the original song do they bring into the new genre? Sometimes you have to translate something from instrumentation, for example. So that's
yeah.
That's the power of these cover songs. They tell a lot about decision making, about transformation.
Yeah, and you learn different things from covers of new songs than from covers of old ones, because they've had like more time to sink in. So, as a big Kate Bush fan from back in the 80s, I was super pleased that Running Up That Hill got popular again through Stranger Things, both for Kate Bush's sake, but also because that then resulted in hundreds and hundreds of covers. And it was really interesting to me in particular to hear which artists chose to stick to the various details of Kate's vocal delivery on that song, and which did something different. Like almost everybody had to do something different with the instrumentation, even if they're just sort of trying to reproduce it. But she has her performance of that song is very, very particular, and like notes slide, and there's wordless bits to it that are very distinctive. And a lot of people try to reproduce that or are faithful to it in one way or another. And then some people just say, no, I'm not. I'm going to do this song and it's going to have the same melody, but it's not necessarily going to have the same phrasing. It's sort of like, I remember my first friend from another country when I was a kid. She was French, and she would say things and I would try to like reverse, like back out her accent and say them like the way without, like, I imagined there was a way to say that word, a sort of correct way, true way to say the word. And then I would say it one way in my accent, and she would say another way in her accent. And I would try to find the true way. And so covering sometimes is that. It's like, what was this song's essence before this singer sang it, which is tricky if the singer wrote it and the only way you know it is the way they sang it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have one example from, let me say this first. If you listen to cover versions, and you listen to, let's say, the song for the first time, you don't necessarily know all the history. So you can listen one song. For one example, I was once in a car and I had Little Wing from Jimi Hendrix, and it was in the 80s. And the woman who was in the car with me, she said, "Oh, someone covered Little Wing from Sting, because that's the version she heard first. So it's also the perspective of what you hear first will determine what you experience as a cover version.
I was gonna say, I grew up, my parents were folk singers, so I grew up with folk music, and neither of them happened to be Bob Dylan fans. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that we had any Bob Dylan records in the house, but we had, of course, tons of Bob Dylan songs sung by Joan Baez or Judy Collins or somebody else. So for me, that first wave of like, oh, that's what this song sounded like originally, was like hearing Bob Dylan's originals for all these songs that I had heard in other singers' treatments. And that applies to everything in life. Like you think you understand a thing by how you encounter it, but that it has a history before that, and you may have encountered it in what is like historically a weird way, and learning that and understanding, what is weird about what you think of as normal is interesting and super valuable.
Yeah, maybe that's also a very good point for the rest of the of the world. So there are different perspectives to it, different kinds of telling something in a different way, and people might understand it also in a different way. Maybe one last question. From Spotify, you're tracking songs, but now you also have podcasts and also spoken books. Would you also try to make new communities of these three ingredients, so that you say, oh, there's something new that people who listen to this kind of song also listen to that kind of podcast, and maybe that kind of book, or maybe that kind of playlist? Is there something, let's say, cross, how would you call these, the different silos, analyzing to understand the listening behavior of people?
Indeed. And there's like a practical reason to do that. So audiobooks is probably not, like, we just started that, so there's not a ton of data yet. But there's plenty of data with podcasts. So one like practical thing that we do is try to recommend podcasts for people who haven't listened to any podcasts before. So once you start listening to podcasts, then we can say, oh, I see that you're into hockey podcasts and like entrepreneur podcasts, and so and anything that Jennifer Lopez appears on. But if you haven't listened to any, then we can at least say, well, we know what kind of music you like, and here are some podcasts that people who like this kind of music like disproportionately tend to listen to. And I mean, often that's because they're music podcasts. So it's like, a hip hop podcast tends to be popular with hip hop listeners. So if you listen to hip hop, then you might like this podcast. Not only is it a correlation, but it's also like the content. But there are others that are not, you can understand if you know what's happening in culture, but that aren't as direct. Like country music fans often like auto racing podcasts. And that's like, makes sense if you understand like American demographics. But it's not like, there's not a lot of country songs about race car drivers, and the podcasts don't feature country musicians. It's a cultural correlation, not a direct one.
Would there be a tip for the Power of Music Thinking podcast? Because actually, with every episode, I'm talking to someone different, and most of the time, it's also different kind of music and different kind of work, which have a relation because of that person is listening that kind of music and is doing that work. But in every episode, it's different, which is actually the pattern. Is there something that would fit to, do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, my guess is that it probably doesn't, like a relatively small percentage of the podcasts correlate to a music genre fandom. And my guess would be that this one doesn't, like, it crosses music genres. So your audience is probably your audience, because
Genre
they
fluid?
like you, not. Indeed, that'd be my guess, but I could look.
All right. Now, this would be nice. This would be interesting. Glenn, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to share? Is there anything that you would say, oh, that's an interesting one?
I mean, I think, we spent this podcast mostly talking about what I do, and now I feel like I should have a podcast and quiz you about what you do, which is also interesting. But I'm sure you cover what you do in the rest of your work.
The criteria of people in that I have a conversation with are they have to do something special and are musicians or doing something with music that's interesting. So that's my one and only things. It's always about music and it's always about business. And when we talk about business, we can make the flip to music, and we talk about music, we flip it easily to the business that you're doing. So that's my thing, and that's also something I do with clients. And then it's not about me; it's about how do you listen. So my hypothesis often is that the way you listen, and this could be behavior in the way how you listen, but also what you listen to. So that's the relation exactly to your Every Noise website with the different genre types. I would say there is a pattern, and it would be interesting to think about if this pattern also applies to how you listen to your family, to your coworker, to your team, to your organization, to your society. And, it's up to you how big you want to make it. And that music, or let's say that our ears might guide us to something that could help us to have a more meaningful collaboration. And if I may add the last one, also for the planet, so that we solve problems, maybe not by looking at it and thinking about it, but maybe close the eyes, listen to it, and sense and feel that we say, oh, this might be something that you would like to do.
Yeah, I believe that too. I believe that music and food are ways to reach people across cultures and get them out of what they think about as their boundaries and like feel something about what the rest of the world feels or tastes or hears.
Right. And to literally sharing. So what you did, you say what kind of bands you're listening to and how you listen, and sharing this to me. And I write it down. So, oh, that's interesting. Never heard about that band. Low, never heard about it. But I will find out, and I will find out two things. I will find out something that I've never heard before, which will be interesting because someone that means to me or I have a relation just was talking about it, and I might understand better how you talk and what you mean. So that's really, for me, the most important thing to bring these things together. So Glenn, thank you very much for doing this, and also thank you very much for this incredible website. And I will put everything in the show notes, also how people could reach you if they have a question. So thank you very much for being on The Power of Music Thinking.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate this, because listening is one of the top leadership skills, and I feel honored about this. It is my mission to find, create, and share inspirations for meaningful collaboration based on music analogies. If you want to support this, please subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, or write a review on iTunes or Spotify. And more inspirations can be found on musicthinking.com. We have a blog, and you can download the Music Thinking Framework. And finally, I would love to hear your feedback. And if you need help with a business challenge, please reach out to me via email, podcast@musicthinking.com.